Well, you won't believe what happened at tonight's committee meeting. The Players' last production was an Agatha Christie mystery directed by Charles. Well, it was a waste of time in my opinion. I mean, it wasn't even a Poirot one. What was the point? But each to their own. Anyway, at tonight's meeting, Susan casually describes it as the Players' most successful production ever. Unbelievable. And factually inaccurate. It sold well, no doubt about it, but that was only because it was May and nobody had anything better to do. Plus, people thought Poirot was going to be in it, and the two people I spoke to were incredibly disappointed. So, obviously, I had to raise an objection, which prompted some pretty heated debate. Eventually, we managed to reach a compromise, and Susan agreed to simply describe it as a very successful production in the minutes. Although I did notice that she underlined very, which I thought was a bit much. Just had some very exciting news. Turns out that a local TV news programme wants to run a piece on the Players. It came through Charles, so I don't know the ins and outs, but I assume it's at least partly driven by the buzz generated by a summer and springtime. I had heard it was making some waves in the village. I did actually contact the editor of the local paper, the Dingbury Gazette, about it, but I never heard back from them, which I thought was a bit rude, frankly. I mean, it's not like I have much else to report on. And last week they ran a feature piece on squirrels. And that was one of their more interesting stories. Still, it's their loss. Well, I expect the TV guys will want someone to give a brief history of the Players. We've been Dingbury's foremost amateur theatre group since 1992. The Players were actually founded in 1987, but everyone agrees that the first 5 years were pretty rough. Things proceeded uneventfully until the Great Schism of 2000. That's the official name for it, when a bunch of disaffected members broke away to form a rival group. It was before my time, but Charles was around then, so I assume he was somehow to blame. Anyway, this rival group put on one production, but quickly realised that Dingbury isn't really big enough for two theatre groups and came back to the fold. Apparently they were quite good actors, so nobody could really afford to hold it against them. The Players really came into their own, though, when the village hall was redeveloped to give us a proper performance and rehearsal space for the first time. Before that, we were based in a pub function room, and to be honest, the easy access to alcohol didn't always lead to the most productive rehearsals. I remember one time, Steve was rehearsing a scene where his character was drunk, and he decided to warm up for it by drinking 5 pints. To be fair to him, it was very convincing. The only problem was, the next thing he had to do was receiving the news that his wife had died. He couldn't stop laughing. It got quite awkward. You know, it does show that there are limits to method acting. For Steve, anyway. Maybe Dustin Hoffman would have handled it differently. He's a professional. Steve's an accountant. My own journey with the Players started 10 years ago, when I moved to the village after university. Well, I was keen to get back into the world of theatre, so the Players were a natural fit for me. I don't think I'm exaggerating when I say that I quickly became indispensable. Not least because at that time I was the only man in the group under the age of 35. Eventually, I decided it was time I gave something back, so I stood for election to the committee. I think it's fair to say that the group had become, a little stale, resting on its laurels, and needed shaking up a bit. Sometimes you benefit from an outsider's perspective. Not that I was an outsider. I've been a member for 5 years by that stage, but I think the point still stands. Anyway, I was elected in a landslide, or at least I would have been if anyone had stood against me. Somehow though, and I still don't understand what they were thinking, the rest of the committee chose Charles's chair over me, which I think everyone would now agree was a mistake. Apart from Susan, obviously, and probably Chris. Not sure where Paula would stand now, come to think of it. And Megan voted for me at the time, so actually it probably still would be exactly the same result. In the end, I settled for treasurer instead. It wasn't a big deal. The chair is really just a ceremonial position anyway. Controlling the money is where the real power lies. Good news! It looks like the TV guys are going to be filming at one of my rehearsals, which is going to be a great opportunity for me and the rest of the cast to promote summer and springtime. Well, we're going to be running some of the most crucial scenes in the play, including a couple where my character Jack has some pretty dramatic monologues, so I'm going to have to make sure that I'm on top form. They're also going to be filming a committee meeting apparently, which will be interesting. They've asked for a couple of members who are willing to be interviewed, so I'll just let Charles know that as one of our more articulate members, I'm very happy to volunteer. I had thought that the filming would just be at my rehearsal and the committee meeting, but now it seems like everyone's trying to get involved. Charles and Susan are putting on a special workshop. No idea why anyone would want to attend that. Paula's running a social to follow it. Well, I say a social, she's just taking everyone to the pub. And Chris has decided that he's going to be around building a set. I'm worried it's going to be a case of too many cooks spoiling the broth. Or in this case, my play. I mean, that really should be the focus of the piece. Everything else is pretty much irrelevant. It could be worse though. The TV guys were quite interested in speaking to a few ordinary members, but everyone on the committee agreed that probably wouldn't be the best idea. I mean, that's one of the reasons you elect a committee, to speak on the members' behalf. Well, it turned into quite a fiery committee meeting in the end. There was some pretty strong disagreement, to put it mildly, over which member should be interviewed. Basically, everyone thought that it should be them. Well, in the end, we managed to agree that it would be me, Charles and Susan, which I suppose is a fair outcome. Well, even I had to concede that as chair, Charles probably does need to be featured, even though I have some pretty strong doubts that he's going to come across well. Having said that, Susan's probably a bigger worry. I'll be amazed if she talks about anyone other than herself, and now is really the time to be promoting the plays as a whole rather than individuals. I bet she doesn't even mention my play. Well, that was quite an experience. First time I've been featured on television, or at least it will be. It hasn't aired yet, obviously, but we finished all the filming. I think it's going to have a really positive impact. I have to say, all the cast really raised their game in front of the camera in rehearsal. The director did ask if they could see some scenes with other members of the cast, which I was fine with. I think they wanted a bit of insight into the role of the director as well as the performers. It's important that they capture all the different stages that go into putting on a successful production. I do think my interview was the only coherent one though. Susan, as expected, spent most of the time talking about herself, whereas Charles blathered on about something or other. I don't know what. I was so bored I stopped listening. Well, the piece has just aired, and I have to say, I think we all came across very well. Even Susan wasn't as bad as I feared, although that might have been because she was only featured for 15 seconds. It was interesting that the director clearly made the creative decision to focus on the ensemble nature for summer and springtime, rather than individual performances, which I'm very supportive of. I must say, I didn't quite understand why they spent so much time talking to Chris. I suppose some people like hearing about set building. I'm just not sure who they are.